Due to the actions of the Israeli government and various groups that are aligned with the Israeli government, there has been a lot of tension between Palestine and Israel over recent months, culminating in the conflict you're seeing now, which happened because Israel provoked a reaction through hurting peaceful protesters, people celebrating Ramadan, and of course evicting people, illegally evicting people. Now, of course, when you have something like this, you also have a lot of celebrities weighing in and a lot of politicians as well. Now, I have to say, I said this on Twitter earlier, the condemnation of Israel for their actions is probably one of the largest I've seen on social media in my time following politics, I say over the last 10 years. So that gives me a lot of hope, and a lot of actors are doing it as well, and it feels like before you wouldn't really get this. I've seen a few Asian actors, of course a lot of black actors, all supporting the Palestinians, and that's been really great to see. Of course, very disappointing that some white actors, or probably most white actors, who were so vocal about police brutality last year and were so vocal in their support for Black Lives Matter, were so vocal in using pretty, I guess, radical language for them about how the US is a racist country, seemingly don't have any words for what's going on right now. And that is very unfortunate that they leave it to other people. They leave it to people from groups who are often marginalised in the US to discuss these things. As someone with an Irish background, it's pretty depressing that it seems like the only white Western people who often talk about this stuff in the public eye are people with a background from a country that has suffered a similar type of oppression, whether that be from, Israel, or whether that be from, the United Kingdom or America and stuff. Why do we have to leave it to these people? I wish people who are just, from a country like England, for example, and have an English background, I wish they would just speak up and use their privilege and use their voice and not leave it to everyone else. But in this video, we're going to be talking about the two most prominent Israeli actresses, Gal Gadot and Natalie Portman, and how they responded to what's going on right now, but also how they tackle Israeli politics in general. To support my work continuing for the future, regardless of what YouTube do, please consider becoming a patron. If you want to join our growing community, please check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, check out @the_Kavernacle on Instagram and Twitter. And also u/TommyCahill1995 for my personal Reddit. Thank you so much for the support over the recent months. We're chugging along to 35k for every 5k. We get a new chocolate orange, so help me build a pyramid, help me get to 35. Also, I have a live stream archive channel, because I live stream 2 times a week, called the Kavernacle Extra. Now, in the latest live stream, I talked about Andrew Yang and his take on Israel. So if you want to listen to me talk about Israel, Israeli history, Middle Eastern history at length, and give my, really, really long opinion on this stuff, go check out my latest stream. But we're also in this stream at the end going to talk about my opinion on this stuff, just to close it off. Again, if you want a bigger, longer take on this stuff, please go check out the latest live stream. So let us start with Gal Gadot. Now, she tweeted and posted on Instagram what she thought of what was going on, in Israel and Gaza right now, after Hamas had launched rockets and Israel responded disproportionately, like they always do, by flattening some tower blocks and killing lots of civilians, including children. And you can see some awful videos, and I don't get disturbed by a lot of stuff, really. I feel like I'm a bit desensitized, but some of the stuff I've been watching about what's going on in Gaza right now in East Jerusalem is really just completely sickening. Like, it literally gives me anxiety watching these things just because it's so bad. So if you're not a total psychopath and you're just, a human being who has some common humanity with people, I feel like your reaction will probably be one of, being pretty sickened by what the Israelis are doing. But Gal Gadot, former IDF soldier, says, "My heart breaks. My country is at war. I worry for my family, my friends. I worry for my people. This is a vicious cycle that has been going on for far too long. Israel deserves to live as a free and safe nation. Our neighbours deserve the same. I pray for the victims and their families. I pray for this unimaginable hostility to end. I pray for our leaders to find the solution so we can live side by side in peace. I pray for better days." Now, it's a really, really interesting and biased framing. The fact she can't actually bring herself to say the Palestinians is really telling. Also, her country is at war is very telling. This isn't a war. This isn't some sort of self-defense by Israel. They provoked this reaction and then use this reaction to disproportionately target civilians in Gaza. This isn't a war. And the whole conflict arises from Israel ethnically cleansing these areas with illegal evictions and illegal settlements. So to frame it in this way, like it's just some sort of conflict that just, spontaneously came out of nowhere, when the side she's supporting and is worried about is clearly not only the oppressor, but the aggressor in this instance, just shows you, how awful this person is. And we're going to get into her service in the IDF and things like that as well. Rightly, everyone was dunking on her, so I'm going to read some tweets and some reactions. So from me, no mention of Palestinians, not surprising, from a former IDF soldier. Also, let's look at how many of the progressive celebs like her tweet. Now, a fun game for you, because I don't follow many celebrities. In the comments, please list any so-called woke, liberal, left celebrities who are liking this Gal Gadot tweet. The first person I saw was January Jones from Mad Men. Another person said that Jason Momoa also liked this tweet, so let me know if any other people have. So May Soon saying, her nameless, faceless neighbours she just actively oppressed. Hashtag Jerusalem. Praga U, the infamous far-right group who put out awful far-right propaganda, says it's the most uncontroversial take imaginable, and yet predictably the left hates her for it. I don't understand how that is uncontroversial at all when you don't even mention the Palestinians and make it look like Israel are the victims in this circumstance. My pal Mike from the Humanist Report says the ratio on this tone-deaf bullshit is incredibly satisfying, and the official State of Israel Twitter account says, "We love you, Gal Gadot." That seems very strange for an official state, Twitter account. But let's get into Gal Gadot's IDF service quick, and also her previous tweets about this stuff. So I've said before that I don't necessarily hold it against Israelis for being forced to serve in the IDF. And the reason why is that unless you have a specific exemption, you have to join the IDF. Now, like I said, if we had this in the UK, I wouldn't join the British military. I'd rather go to jail, but that's just me because, of my Irish background and stuff. And let's not forget the hero that was Taylor Swift Updates, who went to prison because they didn't want to join the IDF. So who remembers this legendary exchange? So Taylor Swift Update says, "As most of you know, I haven't been very active in the past couple of months because I was in prison. I'm back now though, more Taylor Swift updates coming soon." Someone asked, "Oh my god, why?" And they said, "I refuse to join the IDF, Lamau." So I'm going to put some pictures on screen. Here's Gal Gadot when she served in the IDF. It was in, I think, 2006, during actually the Israeli war with Lebanon. And she says she was just a fitness instructor for 2 years. You cannot find her service record online. I've tried. Maybe you can, but I've looked pretty hard and I can't find it. And she said in interviews all she did was do fitness for people. Now, most women in the IDF do not serve in combat roles, but in my other video about this stuff, I spoke about the exemptions and women who do serve in specific combat roles. So I'm just going to play that clip of me reading this out. Supporting all Jewish Israelis are required to serve in the IDF, with men serving in active duty for 2 years and 8 months, and women serving for 2 years. Combat soldiers remain in reserves until they are 51. Women mainly serve in non-combat roles, but are also eligible for 2 combat units. For Kavernacle, a mixed unit of men and women who defend the Israeli-Egyptian border, and the occassions, the elite K9 unit, certain exemptions are possible. Minorities such as Arab Israelis, those who are physically or psychologically unfit for service, married women, women with children, and ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews are not required to serve, but many volunteer anyway. Then 3% of active duty soldiers are recent immigrants or volunteers from abroad. So I guess my more centrist take is I do not necessarily hold it against her for being in the IDF. I mean, I totally respect Taylor Swift Updates for not joining. I wouldn't join personally. But when you're in a society where most of your friends probably will be joining, male and female, it's probably hard to be the one who says no. So whatever, she was in the IDF. That's obviously bad, but, you're conditioned. I believe a lot of people don't have free will. The bad part is that she wasn't only in the IDF, is that she supports Israel's wars, essentially, or she tries to both sides them. So she's deleted this now, but this is pretty famous. She also was supporting the Israeli war with Gaza in 2014. So I'm going to read out her post. She says, I'm sending my love and prayers to fellow Israeli citizens, especially to all the boys and girls who are risking their lives protecting my country against the horrific acts conducted by Hamas, who are hiding like cowards behind women and children. We shall overcome. Shabbat Shalom. Hashtag we are right. Hashtag free Gaza from Hamas. Hashtag stop terror. Hashtag coexistence. Hashtag love IDF. When you see how Israel conduct warfare in Gaza, there is no way you can support actions by the Israeli Defense Force and then pretend you care about children and women and talk about, trying to get rid of Hamas and everything like that. I'm going to get into Hamas as well in a second. So yeah, obviously awful politics, supports this awful Israeli aggression, tries to both sides it, is heavily bought into the propaganda, but most Western people do as well. Now, the funny thing about Hamas is that Hamas was actually nurtured by the Israeli government in that you had the secular PLO led by Arafat, who of course had engaged in military war with the Israelis in the past, but were more secular and were also more willing to compromise. And then you had Hamas, which was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, if you know anything about the Muslim Brotherhood, how they essentially work is as, community groups. They help the poor, they set up kitchens, they help with workers' rights. Pretty good stuff in that regard, but their ideology is quite, Islamic fundamentalist. They've been widely persecuted in Egypt. And of course, they actually seized power after the revolution, only to be ousted again. And Hamas, yet like I said, is an offshoot of that. And there's a really good video on The Intercept which talks about how Israeli officials helped fund Hamas initially because they wanted to divide and rule the Palestinians in the occupied territories. So they thought the Muslim Brotherhood, which became, Hamas, would be a good counter to it, and you could maybe, divide these guys and they wouldn't all support the PLO. And then what happens is you essentially have a Frankenstein's monster where you actually have a group of Islamic fundamentalists who are very militant, who won't back down. They're still a problem for the Israelis today, although they became a convenient excuse. And what actually happened is during the elections, and I think in 2004, or was it 2005, is that loads of Palestinians voted for Hamas as the leaders of, the region in Gaza. Because Hamas, with their community organizing and their militant stance, became to be seen by many Palestinians as the only people who would defend them. And lots of them became dissatisfied with the PLO and Fatah because they felt like they were selling them out to the West and to Israel. So not only do the Israelis like to scapegoat Hamas for their actions against Palestinian civilians, Hamas itself was fostered and nurtured by the Israeli government to try and divide the Palestinians, only for a lot of Palestinians to rally behind Hamas and make them a dominant power in the region. Groups like this can only thrive when it feels like there's no alternative for people. Israel exports water where most people in Gaza cannot access clean water. That is what this oppression looks like. This is why people feel so passionate about it. So Gal Gadot is largely trash for her takes on this stuff. But I thought it'd be interesting in this video to also talk about Natalie Portman, who herself was born in Israel. And she's actually talked about how, proud she is to be Israeli, just like Gal Gadot has. And she talked about how much it means to her to be Israeli and stuff. And Natalie Portman is also against BDS and stuff. So she's no radical leftist when it comes to Israel-Palestine. But she does seem to be someone who actually acknowledges Israel being at fault for a lot of this stuff. So I want to get into her. So firstly, how she responded to the recent conflict. Now, she hasn't said too much. She only has Instagram. But at least she didn't use her platform to try and make Israel's aggression look like it was some sort of act of self-defense. So Natalie Portman shared Viola Davis's post where she talks about Sheikh Jarrah, and I'm going to just read you the post because it's an informative post so people don't know about this stuff anyway. But remember, Natalie Portman shared this post. So it goes on to say, in October 2020, an Israeli court ruled to forcibly evict 12 Palestinian families from the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. As a result of the Israeli court ruling, 550 Palestinians faced the threat of depossession. The court also ruled that each evicted refugee family must pay $20,000 to cover the settlers' legal expenses. Sheikh Jarrah is home to 3,000 Palestinians, all refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their homes in other parts of Palestine in the 1948 war. Under the agreement between Jordan and the UNRWA in 1956, these families were promised housing and land in Sheikh Jarrah. The families were meant to receive ownership titles after 3 years. This never happened as Israel conquered East Jerusalem before the titles materialised. Per Associated Press News, settler groups say the land was owned by Jews prior to the 1948 war surrounding Israel's creation. Israeli law allows Jews to reclaim such land but bars Palestinians from recovering property they lost in the same war, even if they still reside in areas controlled by Israel. Israel captured East Jerusalem in the 1967 war, along with the West Bank and Gaza, and annexed it in a move that is not recognised internationally. In 1972, settler groups told the families that they were trespassing on Jewish-owned land. That was the start of a long legal battle that in recent months has culminated with eviction orders against 36 families in Sheikh Jarrah and 2 other East Jerusalem neighbourhoods. Israeli rights groups say that other families are also vulnerable, estimating that more than 1,000 Palestinians are at risk of being evicted. Israeli views all of Jerusalem as its unified capital and says residents are treated equally, but East Jerusalem residents have different rights depending on whether they are Jewish or Palestinian. Jews born in East Jerusalem are automatically granted Israeli citizenship, and Jews from anywhere else in the world are eligible to become Israelis. Palestinians born in East Jerusalem are granted a form of permanent residency that can be revoked if they spend too much time living outside the city. They can apply for Israeli citizenship and must go through a difficult and uncertain bureaucratic process that can take months or years. Most refuse because they do not recognise Israel's annexation. Palestinians are also treated differently when it comes to housing, which will make it difficult for Sheikh Jarrah families to remain in Jerusalem if they are evicted. So it goes on to say, tensions have escalated in Jerusalem with Israeli police attacking Palestinian protesters on a daily basis. On Sunday, May 9th, UNICEF released a statement saying over the past 2 days, 29 Palestinian children were injured in East Jerusalem, including the Old City and Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood. 8 Palestinian children were meanwhile arrested. A 1-year-old toddler was among those injured. Some children were taken for treatment at hospitals with injuries in the head and the spine. This comes amid reports that nearly 300 people were injured in the area. The UN's Human Rights Office has called on Israel to immediately halt all forced evictions, including those in Sheikh Jarrah, as well as to exercise maximum restraint in the use of force while ensuring safety and security there. So again, Natalie Portman didn't share this herself, but at least she shared it. She is a prominent Israeli celebrity, really well known, world famous, and she's using her platform to help educate people on what's going on and how the Israelis are illegally evicting these people, according to UN law. Contrast that to what Gal Gadot has said. And also, Natalie Portman has a history of this stuff. Now, again, I'm not saying she's the most radical person, but she is interesting in that she's willing to publicly criticise Israel. So back in 2018, an article from Haaretz, Natalie Portman, Israel's nation-state law is racist and a mistake. In an interview marking the release of her new film, the Israeli-American actress told the London-based Arabid Daily that the law impacts many people's lives and she does not agree with it. Now, she actually said this in an interview. Hopefully I can play some of the audio, but it's BBC, and BBC are really notorious for blocking your content if you use their footage. So I'll see if I can use it, but I'm going to read it anyway.
Recently we had the Israeli Jewish state law that made you more superior than me because you're Jewish and I'm not. How do you feel about that?
It's racist, and there's nothing else to say about that, and it's wrong, and I disagree with that. It's hard to be from a place where your life, you were saying, you don't have a choice. It's political. You're put in the position, and it's the people you love, and their lives are personally affected by all of the decisions politicians make and that their neighbors make for them. I just hope to be part of changing that and making us truly love our neighbors, and work for our neighbors and work with our neighbors, because I don't know, it's hard to be from a place where it's the people, it's like your family. You love them the most, and you also feel the most critical.
In the interview which marked the release of a new film, Vox Lux, Portman explained that the law is a political decision that impacts the lives of many people, adding that she hopes to be part of the change that can improve Israel's relationship with its neighbours. Portman also criticised Donald Trump. Israel's controversial nation-state law, which the Knesset passed in July, states that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people, which has exclusive rights of self-determination in the country. It defines Hebrew as the country's sole official language, designating Arabic as a language of special status, although adding that Arabic status would not be harmed in the process. Critics of the law, which bears constitutional weight, object in part to the fact that it does not include a provision stating that all Israeli citizens are equal under law. This isn't the first time that the Hollywood actress has criticised Israel. Portman, who was born in Israel but moved to the US with her family when she was young, sparked the scandal when she announced in April that she would not come to Israel to accept the Genesis Prize, a $1 million award given annually to Jewish people who've attained recognition and excellence in her fields. And she said, recent events in Israel have been extremely distressing to her, and she does not feel comfortable participating in any public events in Israel, her representative said at the time. Portman has said, though, that she does not support BDS. In 2009, Portman joined other Hollywood stars in protesting calls for a boycott against the Toronto International Film Festival for staging of a Tel Aviv-themed event. She also directed and starred in a Hebrew-language adaptation of Israeli novelist Amos Oz's memoir, A Tale of Love and Darkness. She said, I'm not part of the BDS movement and do not endorse it. Like many Israelis and Jews around the world, I can be critical of the leadership in Israel without wanting to boycott the entire nation. Portman added that she treasures Israeli friends and family, Israeli food, book, art and cinema and dance. She went on to say that Israel was created exactly 70 years ago as a haven for refugees from the Holocaust, but the mistreatment of those suffering from today's atrocities is simply not in line with my Jewish values. Because I care about Israel, I must stand up to violence, corruption, inequality, and abuse of power. So yeah, compare that to Gal Gadot, who seemingly supports Israeli war. Natalie Portman will take a stand when they pass extremely controversial legislation, where Gal Gadot will stay silent on this stuff. And as a member of the IDF and someone who loves the IDF, you can imagine she's been far more brainwashed, and it's just sad that she's, given this platform, and what she does is just really uphold the status quo, upholds the oppression of this stuff. Now, what Natalie Portman said there isn't entirely accurate, and although I think she is a way better Israeli voice on these issues than Gal Gadot, some of the stuff she said is a bit inaccurate. Of course, you cannot separate the Holocaust from the founding of Israel, because many of the founding members of Israel either fought against the Nazis in partisan groups, either fought with the USSR against the Nazis, or they actually suffered in these camps as well. So a lot of them felt like, to end their suffering, which had been going on for, since the Roman burning down of the temple in, I think, 79 AD, that they needed their own country, essentially. And Jewish people in Europe primarily have been one of the most widely persecuted groups throughout the last 2,000 years. Even in weird events like the Crusades, they would go through places like Hungary and kill every Jew they could find because the Jews killed Jesus. Really awful crap like that, and being expelled from places like Spain, England, France, just being expelled on made-up charges so the government and the monarchies could take their property and their wealth. In Spain, I believe the stuff with the Jews, the Moriscos and Muslims is really the start of modern racism, along with the African slave trade. The stuff about your blood, meaning you cannot be a Christian. For example, a lot of Jews had to forced convert in Spain to stay there. But what happened is, even after generations, they would say to these people who had converted is that you aren't actually Christians. You're still Jews because you have Jewish blood. The same with the Muslims, who still had Muslim blood because they had generations in the past who were Muslims. But what is ignored is that Palestinian Jews were pushing for this state before the end of the Second World War, and they were attacking the British mandate. They're attacking the British officials. And they'd been agitating for this stuff for a long time before the end of the Second World War. So that is sort of missing. And then there are different strains of Zionism. The one she's talking about, like the post-Holocaust Zionism, is about creating this state, this safe haven for Jews in Israel. And there are certain strains that are about, Israel should be the home of the Jews, but it's not a home just for the Jews. That's the more liberal interpretation of Zionism. But there's other strains of Zionism. There's another one which believes Israel is only for the Jews and everyone else should get out. And there's another strain that Israel is only for the Jews, but it also should be biblical Israel. And it should be the whole territory which made up biblical Israel. But the thing is, Israeli politics is complicated, and I think there's a lot of nuance lost. Not that you need nuance to condemn what's going on now, but of course there's different strains of Zionism. There's different, political parties in Israel. There's people who feel different ways about different things. But at the moment, with the Netanyahu government and the far right in power, you have more people who support more extreme strains of Zionism that do believe Israel should be a state for the Jews and the Jews only. Now, to end this video, let's get into my opinion of what's going on. Like I said, head over to the Kavernacle Extra and watch my latest live stream if you want to hear a massive breakdown of what's happening, because I talked for 2 hours about this stuff. but I'm going to give a short version here. I'm going to start with the context of the last couple months. You do not need to know about Israeli history. You do not need to know about Israeli politics. You do not need to know about, the burning down of the Jewish temple by the Romans. You do not need to know about the Palestinian Jews movement for Israel, or the Jews coming from Eastern Europe and Europe who are more secularist and pushing for this Israeli state. You don't need to know about this stuff. You just watch what's going on and you know it's wrong. Like I said, I actually had physical anxiety watching some of these clips because you know who the oppressors are. Israel is one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Israel has the guns. Israel has the weapons. Israel has the backing of the United States and the UK and France. It is a powerful, powerful country. And what it's doing to these people who are powerless, the Palestinians, they don't have the capacity to fight back. They cannot control their own affairs while they're being oppressed by this militarized force, the IDF. So to even make some sort of equivocation behind them is extremely wrong. And a lot of people feel like they cannot talk about this stuff if they don't know the background. And we're not talking about, a two-state solution, a one-state solution. We're not talking about what solves these problems. As an individual citizen, in this very moment, you do not have to propose what the answer is. All you've got to say is based on common humanity and these videos you're seeing and these illegal evictions and this illegal push to further colonize the Palestinians, it's wrong. And that is the short of it. Just say it's wrong because it's wrong. The Israelis are clearly the instigators of the violence and they're hiding behind the Hamas reprisals as, justification for what they're doing. And you guys know that is wrong. You can be an Israel supporter. You can believe Israel has this right to exist and should live in peace, as Gadot says. You can say that while also acknowledging what's going on right now is extremely fucked up, because it is. And then if you want to take that a bit further, maybe just educate yourself. Like I said at the start of the video, why does it take the people whose families or have backgrounds where their families were oppressed to talk about these things? I talk about my own family in Ireland and stuff throughout the generations being killed and oppressed by the British. And then you have all these great actors from other backgrounds of people who've been oppressed. Why does it have to be people from these backgrounds who talk about this stuff? Like many nations, Israel's history is very bloody. Its founding was very bloody, just like the United States. It's built on ethnic cleansing. It's built on war. It's built on all these things. So it has a violent history and it's employing settler colonialism right now, just like the United States has done. There are very clear parallels between these two countries, and there's very clear parallels between that and the UK as well. And I don't know if that makes people uncomfortable or they don't want to point it out in another country because it's happened in their own country. But there's something I tweeted today as well. It's like loads of white streamers, loads of YouTubers, people who made like gaming videos, people who did all this stuff, were going out to protest, talking about Black Lives Matter. They weren't only doing this, they were talking about the history of black people in the United States and how much they have suffered in very explicit terms. Systemic racism, pointing out how the system is still racist, how the system has always kept black people marginalized, how the system has always done this stuff. They talk about all that stuff. But when it comes to Israel, when it has very clear parallels and you can see it for yourself, they're completely silent. I guess there are other reasons, like they don't want to be seen as a racist, someone who hates Jews, because I guess they don't understand the situation in Israel or understand that various different Jewish groups have various different opinions on Israel. Like many very religious Jews think the kingdom of Israel that is coming can only be given by God. And it doesn't actually physically exist before the end times and stuff. And then, like I said, there's different strains of Zionism as well, of what Israel actually looks like. And it's very complicated. And what we're criticizing is settler colonialism, whether that be in the UK, the US, or Israel. It's the same in my mind. It's the powerful are oppressing the powerless. Now, one more thing I want to mention is, why does the US and the UK have such a toxic relationship with discussing Palestinian rights? And just, a small point before we finish the video is that a lot of people in the US think AIPAC is controlling the discourse. This Israeli lobby group. And I think AIPAC has more of an influence on the Democrats. But in terms of the Republicans, I think the group that have the biggest impact on how we discuss Israel in these countries is evangelical white Christians. Now, I made a video about what these guys think about Israel, but they are massive supporters of Israel. They are massive supporters of this really awful strain of Zionism about, Jewish supremacy in the state of Israel and that it's just for the Jews. They support this stuff. Not because they are Zionists themselves. There are Christian Zionists who believe the Christians are actually the chosen people of God, not the Jews. They believe Israel is key to starting Armageddon and the end times, where the Jews will be asked by God, you will convert or you will die with the rest of us who aren't Christians. Isn't that a lovely prophecy these guys believe in? They are totally not racist, and they're totally just using Jewish Israelis as pawns for their crazy religious goals. What's even more scary is that Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence actually believed in this stuff, and they're in the top levels of the US government, and Donald Trump had a major backing by these groups, these powerful white evangelical groups which dominate the conservative side of US politics. And it was the age of Ronald Reagan which really let these guys in the front door of the Republican Party. So you wonder why all these far-right extreme Republican politicians totally support everything Israel does, despite far-right Christians being the prime and key tormentor of the Jewish people throughout the last 2,000 years in Europe. It's not because they love Israeli Jews. It's not because they love Israel. It's not because they support Zionism because they are Zionists. They support this stuff to achieve their insane religious goals. But if you want to hear me talk about this more, please check out my video I made about 2 or 3 weeks ago about white evangelicals and why they love Israel. But to sum up, Gal Gadot is complete trash on this issue, and she's a complete trash on her stances on the 2014 war and what's going on right now. Natalie Portman, fair enough, she will actually criticize Israel and the Israeli government. She will use her platform to show you what is happening and how Israel are being the aggressors in this instance. She's still someone who's proud to be Israeli. She sees Israel as a haven for Jews, and she's anti-BDS, so you guys might disagree with her there, but it is nice to see someone who has a massive platform, who is one of the most famous Israeli people in the West, actually use it to promote, good and promote an education on what's going on right now, rather than Gal Gadot, who literally is just blaming the Palestinians for their own oppression. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments about this. Please leave a like, maybe subscribe to the channel. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram, come join our communities at Discord and my subreddit as well. If you want to support my work, please have a look at my Patreon, also in the description. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.